Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to BioPharm's now 9th webinar in our series of CTMS specific webinars. The previous 8 webinars on CTMS are available for download on our website. So the recordings are available on our website, www.biopharm.com, at any time, and they cover a variety of topics such as CTMS 101, Siebel Clinical Best Practices, Post-Implementation, Increase ROI through Effective CTMS Training Program, and a couple others around integration of CTMS. Today we're going to discuss how Siebel Clinical can help you in your specific job function. We're going to look at 6 different roles and talk through the ways in which Siebel Clinical supports and simplifies the tasks that are handled by each role. Let me start by introducing myself. My name is Param Singh, and I am the Vice President of Clinical Trial Management Solution Practice here at BioPharm Systems. I've been working in the industry since 1999 and have almost exclusively been working with Siebel Clinical during that time. Before joining BioPharm about 4 years ago now, I was part of Accenture's pharma R&D practice and leading Siebel CTMS implementations there as well. Overall, I've been a part of now 16 implementations of Siebel Clinical, and these vary from implementations for large pharma, CROs, medical device companies, academic institutions, and they range from anywhere from small implementations of 30 users to global implementations of over 4,000 users. And so each type of and size of organization and implementation has its own approach to selecting and implementing this solution. Now that I've introduced myself, I'd like to take a minute to talk about my team here at BioPharm and explain a little bit more about what we do. We provide a variety of services and products related to CTMS. We manage implementations of Siebel Clinical, whether those are custom implementations or implementations of our Siebel Clinical Accelerator Ascend. Also, if you've seen some of our previous webinars, you know that we do extensive work with integrations in Siebel Clinical and related systems. Our approach to system implementations is very process-focused, and we always provide our process consulting services to help organizations define and harmonize their SOPs and business processes across their organization with respect to clinical trial management. And we also offer comprehensive training services and products related to Siebel Clinical and our Ascend solution. This is just a glimpse of some of the services and products that our practice offers in this space. And for more information, feel free to contact me at any time. So here's today's agenda. Since not everyone on the call is familiar with Siebel Clinical, we're going to spend a few minutes discussing what it is and how it works. And after that, we'll look at each of the 6 key roles listed here and talk about how Siebel Clinical supports each role. And at the end, we'll have some time for questions. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the platform we're using. Right now, we have everyone else on mute. So if you do have an issue, please click on the Raise Hand button, and we'll pause and address the issue that you're having. Also, if you have any questions that you'd like me to answer at the end of the webinar during the Q&A session, please submit them in the chat function on the page at any time. So those questions are going to come directly to me, and then I'll have a listing of questions at the end for me to answer during the Q&A session. I also want to remind everyone that we're recording this presentation, and we're going to post it on our website afterwards. Let's get started. So first, let's talk about what a CTMS is and what specifically Siebel Clinical is. A clinical trial management system, or CTMS, is a technology solution designed to help pharmaceutical, biotech, medical device, and clinical research organizations manage all aspects of the clinical trials efficiently and effectively, and thereby reducing time and cost through the clinical trial process. It essentially tracks the metadata of the trial itself to effectively track the studies and related activities and payments, etc. Siebel Clinical is a robust CTMS solution that serves as the central repository of clinical trial management information. It provides greater visibility into real-time site and study statistics, which can enable companies to make better decisions during clinical trials. Siebel Clinical helps manage each step of the clinical trial process, so from site selection to site and study closeout. Siebel Clinical is now clearly the leader in the space, with the most user base in the industry than any other CTMS system. It's highly configurable, so organizations of different types and different business processes can implement Siebel Clinical by configuring and enabling their business process and SOPs in the system. Before we get into the specifics of each role in the system, let's cover some basics about how data is organized within the Siebel Clinical system. This is a visual representation of the clinical data hierarchy in the system. At the highest level, you have your clinical program, which is basically just a logical grouping of your protocols or studies. Products, your organization's products, are associated at this highest level in the system as well. Under the clinical program, you have your studies or your protocols. This is where you basically, basic study setup happens, and to accomplish that, the definition of your protocol or your visit schedule is translated into what's called the subject visit template in the system. So that's taken directly from your actual protocol document, your listing of subject visits that are going to happen as this protocol dictates. Under the protocol, we have region, which allows us to segment out our sites under the protocol by region or country. So again, it's more of a grouping for sites, so you can segment out that these sites are in U.S. and these sites are in Canada, for example. On the left-hand side of the graphic, we can see three boxes in red, which are labeled contacts, accounts, and addresses. Siebel is a relational database, so these red boxes represent your pool of external persons and organizations you interact with on a study. These could be physicians, lab techs, contract CRAs, or even reps from some vendor organizations for contacts. And it could be hospitals, clinics, labs, and various external vendor organizations for accounts. So they're entered in the system once and stored in this area of the application. For sites, which is under regions, this is nothing more than a relationship between the protocol or protocol/region, and then you select a contact for your primary investigator and an account selected as the physical location of the site. So the site is essentially a relationship between those entities and created as a definition underneath that protocol. Under the site, of course, you have your subjects or patients, and those subjects will have visits tracked in the system based on, again, the subject visit schedule that was set up during the study setup in the system. So now that we have a little context, let's discuss details that are commonly seen in the organizations that use the CTMS. So before we dive in, I want to let you know that with these while the job functions that we're going to cover today are common, these are by no means set in stone. So you can actually define your own roles within the system and define additional roles within the system. Siebel offers a great deal of flexibility defining user roles and what users can do and what users can and cannot do within the system. So as I explain each of these typical job functions, keep in mind that they can always be modified and tailored to fit your organization. So first, let's discuss the clinical administrator role. The clinical administrator does several specific tasks within the system to ensure that the system is ready for use by the other users. First, the clinical administrator is responsible for all centralized study startup tasks. They'll create and define products within the system. They will create, define, and update your clinical programs. And they will do all of the study setup tasks to get the protocols entered in the system as well as the region level. So essentially, they create the shell records for future use by other users. So they do the setup tasks of these records so that other roles and users in the system can then manage and start tracking details for those records. The administrator also assigns the teams to your protocols and regions, as well, so to grant access to the appropriate users within the system to each protocol and region. The next main task that typically the clinical administrator will take on is centralized investigator database management. Like I mentioned before, since this is a relational database, and the contact and the account and address records are shared records or reference data, it's actually best practice that this reference data be centrally administered. So the initial entry and update of contacts, accounts, and addresses is done by the administrator. Other users can only create associations as they need for protocols, regions, sites, etc. Each one of these records, record types of contacts, accounts, and addresses is actually a separate record type within the system. And that's by design. So for example, if Dr. Smith and Dr. Jones both have the same main address and it's at the clinic where they share that address, the address itself is only in the system once. And it's associated to each of those two investigators and the account, which is the clinic, that all share that address. The next main task that the admin fulfills is in the system is the creation of templates within the system. A template in Siebel Clinical is a listing of activities, tasks, milestones, or documents that is entered in the system once and that can be reused multiple times by applying that template at various levels to ensure standardization of those tasks, milestones, or documents as part of your clinical trial management process. Essentially, it's a way for the system to enable standards in tracking various data within the system. So the ones listed here are the specific templates that the clinical administrator is responsible for. Activity or document templates. These are basically, they translate your SOPs into templates that can be used over and over. So examples of this are when you have a study that's starting up, there's a list of tasks or milestones that need to be achieved and a listing of documents that need to be tracked or submitted to get that protocol started. And that's typically the same tasks and the same number of documents anytime a study is starting, and it's typically defined in your SOP. So what we do as part of the implementation is translate that into a template within the system so that any and every time that you're starting a study and doing that study startup, we can actually just apply a template and all of those activities and documents are ready for us to track to. So this template functionality allows us to ensure that standardization, ensure consistency across studies, and allow our users to be compliant with our SOPs directly in the system. Assessment templates are, they create standard evaluation criteria and answer criterion for each assessment that we do against an individual. So if we're doing investigator assessments on their performance on a particular study, we can actually set up a template that we use over and over again that is basically an objective assessment of performance for an investigator on a study. So at the end of the day, if we're using a standard assessment, we actually have an apples-to-apples comparison with the performance of all investigators against all of our studies within the system. Subject visit template, we talked about that earlier a little bit. So this is what you do to translate your subject visit schedule from your protocol document into a template in the system, again, during study setup. And then this can be applied to each site. So every time, if you have multiple versions of that template, if you've done protocol amendments, we actually, the system allows you to do amendments on that visit schedule. And then ultimately, when the sites are IRB approved to start participating in the study, we'll assign that template to the site, and then as we screen and enroll patients, it's actually working against that subject visit template. And again, it ensures that consistency, and it also drives the investigator payment process, because we've actually tied our standard payment amounts against those visits and procedures that are locked in our subject visit schedule. The next role we'll discuss is the clinical document associate. So this individual uses the specific activity and document templates that the clinical administrator set up and applies them to protocols, regions, and sites to track a standard list of documents for each study. Examples of some documents that you'll track for every site in each study are things like investigator CV, the protocol signature page, IRB approvals, etc. So, and also regulatory users would also potentially use Siebel Clinical to ensure that all essential documents have been sent and received from site. They're all approved, 1572, financial disclosure, CVs, investigator licenses, so that we can actually initiate this site and send investigational product to the site. So regulatory has a specific role to play as well once all those documents are in. For the documents that are tracked in the system, the users basically just track dates and statuses to follow the entire life cycle of that document. So users may track, sent to site date, expected date, received from site date, approved date, signature date, expired date, etc. So you have a variety of dates and potentially statuses that you'll track against that document. And the user may also query the Siebel system for documents that are for example, still not back from site, or documents that are ready to expire. So they can perform specific follow-ups on those documents after they run those specific queries within the system. The next role we'll discuss is the clinical finance user. The clinical finance user is actually going to work with the clinical administrator to set up standard payment amounts for milestones, visits, and procedures that will pay the investigator for on each study. So when we're defining the subject visit template, the standard amounts need to be entered at that level when we're setting up the subject visit schedule. So we capture that for a screening visit, the enrollment visit, what we're actually paying to the investigators. At the site level, they're going to enter in a site budget and designate actual payees for each site. So they record the clinical trial agreements, what the actual budget, full budget is for that site, and capture that contract information. Also, during the site negotiations, we'll also note the special payment exceptions that a site will have if they're deviating from the standard amounts that we set up at the study level. So although the system through this template functionality allows for standardization of those payments, we still have the flexibility of on a site-by-site basis to put in payment exceptions. So for example, if for Site 101, the screening visit is typically $100, but for Site 101, we're actually going to be paying $150. So there's ways to do exceptions within the system, and this is what clinical finance actually does at those levels to ensure that the system is set up properly for investigator payments. So also so now that the sites are set up, the study's set up, we actually can now start having activities that are ready to be paid for. And if payment amounts need to be adjusted in any way, sort of incorrect payment amount is found after the subject visit has been completed, we can actually correct it ad hoc in the system. So the clinical finance person is actually going to be doing those adjustments and potentially overriding some of those payment amounts within the system. Once all of the payment activities are, again, ready to be paid for, the clinical finance person is also the one that will potentially generate the payment requests. So, if this is done on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis or ad hoc, depending on your organization's requirements, the clinical finance person will actually look at the completed number of activities and then create the payment request for all of the completed and verified activities for that particular site. After that payment is generated and then approved and sent to accounts payable, once that payment is actually sent out from your organization as a check or a wire transfer or direct deposit, the payment details of that particular payment will then be entered back into the system. Now, typically, this is a key area of integration with an accounts payable system, but if that integration is not in place, then again, it's the clinical finance person that's responsible for getting those payment details back into the system. Site advances. Again, when we're starting a study, when we're initiated a site, there may be advances that we need to send to the site. So these ad hoc payments for site advance are also set up by the clinical finance resource. These could be initial payments that are strictly startup payments that we're not recovering, or it could be advance payments that we will try to recover in time. So if we're prepaying them for activities that they're going to complete, then we want to actually recover that amount over time. And so in the system, you can actually choose whether to recover that or whether it was a startup payment that you're not going to recover as they complete activities for subjects. Site fees as well, so reimbursement for travel expenses, IRB fees, and other expenses, you can actually track that within the system as well. And again, that'll be your clinical finance that's doing that. You have the opportunity to define unlimited payment amounts to track at the level of detail that you need. So this is helpful for the recent changes to the Sunshine Act, where we're actually required to track any and all expenditures on doctors. So any of the specific payments that are related to this particular site, we can actually track those within the system. So this is going to be helpful for tracking and reporting specifically for the changes for the Sunshine Act. So the clinical finance resource will also, so as all of this is happening within the system, it's actually developing a full financial snapshot of that site of that region and of that protocol. So the more info views display planned and accrued site expenses for all sub-levels in the hierarchy, and they track, so everything rolls up to the site level in terms of investigator payments. So clinical finance has the ability to view aggregate information about the expenditures on sites and countries and protocols. Also in our Ascend configuration, we've actually also put in the ability to track accrued expenses against contracted budgets as well. So this allows, in addition to investigator payments, other expenses related to protocols are also entered and tracked within the system, and it gives a full financial snapshot against that protocol. So now a clinical finance resource can see, dollar for dollar spend against all of our spend against a protocol. And they have the ability to also query and run ad hoc reports by site, by region, by protocol, by status. So really slicing and dicing that data to look at specific aspects of the investigator payments or the expenses that are being tracked within the system. So for example, if I wanted to see a listing of all of my study advances or site advances against my entire study, I can see that, or see any and all payment requests that are still in the that have still not been paid out by my organization. I can actually get that level of detail directly from the system. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the CRA, or the monitor. And so the CRA and monitor are going to be actually doing quite a lot of data entry within the system. The bulk of the work sort of happens here at the site level. So site setup is their responsibility. Setting up sites, associating site contacts, so building that site personnel or site contact team, associating any accounts. So we have labs or local IRBs and site addresses. So where does the site want drugs shipped? Where does the site want payment sent? All of this is the site setup that the CRA or the monitor is going to be doing at the site management level. Site maintenance, just keeping contacts up to date. So as site personnel are added or removed from the site as it relates to this study, you're going to keep that site contacts up to date. We're going to track any and all ancillary and clinical supplies that we're sending to the site. So we have the ability in Ascend, in our configuration, to track all of this information. So clinical supplies and ancillary supplies are some of the key things that the CRA and monitor is going to track within the system. And we're also going to track documents, tasks, and general correspondence. So after the documents have been applied, the milestone templates have been applied to the site, the CRA and the monitor are going to track against those specific tasks. And also any and all relevant correspondence is also able to be tracked within the system. Site monitoring, you're going to be, as a CRA and monitor, tracking follow-up issues, so any action items, any open issues that are either uncovered during a site visit or outside of site visit, you'll be able to track within the system. Any protocol deviations, high-level information about protocol deviations, whether they're site or subject-related. High-level information about the adverse events that we're monitoring at the site can be entered in the system as well. And CRF records, so monitoring CRF records, when you've retrieved them, when they're sent to data management, et cetera. And all of these are, again, these are enhancements in our Ascend configuration to be able to track all of these pieces of information. And then from a site monitoring perspective, also completing and submitting trip reports within the system. So your electronic trip report within the Siebel Clinical system, the complete sort of management and submission of that trip report happens within the system as well. For subject tracking, in a scenario where we do not have integration to a clinical data management system or an EDC or an IVRS, you'll actually be entering subjects within the system, recording their informed consent, recording subject status changes, such as early terminations, screen failures, etc. And as you screen and enroll the patients, you'll be recording the completion dates for subject visits. Now, all of this is semi-manual within the Siebel Clinical system, but this is a key area that gets high priority for integration to a clinical data management system like Oracle Clinical or EDC systems or IVRS systems. So in an integrated scenario, subject tracking becomes a whole lot easier because all of those records are actually being populated automatically through the integration. So all we're doing as monitors is really just viewing that information is coming through. Next is our executives. So what the executives are really interested in is being able to get the big picture about our progress as an organization, as a clinical operations organization, against all of our studies. So the ability to be able to look at clinical program level information and actually dive down into the details as needed for protocols, sites, etc. So in the system, there's a bird's eye view at the program level, at the clinical program level, which is the highest level, where you can do where you can explore within that program, look at each and all of the protocols within that program, look at the regions within that protocol, and look at all the sites and detailed information right from that one view. So the system really allows a great visibility to executives at that clinical program level to be able to see how everything rolls up and what the current state of that program is, but also the ability to sort of dive into the details as needed to see the details that are behind that roll-up. In addition to that, executives are interested in metrics. So there's not many metrics available out of the box for Siebel Clinical, but or common requirements to sort of put together some metrics within the system for custom implementations. So what we did is we actually put some metrics within Ascend where you can actually view turnaround times for trip report submissions and approvals, as well as investigator payment, request and then approval, and then finally paying the investigator. So really trying to focus in on 2 or 3 key areas where it shows us how well we're doing as an organization in terms of turnaround time. So you can actually see and target, if you have specific goals that, a trip report needs to be submitted 2 weeks after the visit is complete, and then the approval needs to happen 2 weeks after the initial submission. If you have, certain goals in-house for those specific turnarounds, then through these metrics you're able to target and say, show me all of the site visits that took longer than 2 weeks, or trip reports that took longer than 2 weeks to get submitted. And then you can see what that trend is. Is it the same CRA? Is it the same study manager? Is it the same study, for example? So you can really hone in on what's causing that delay and how do we correct it. So I mentioned this before, roll-ups. All the views at the program level are aggregates of the subviews. So for example, when you look at programs within the system, Underneath that, you'll be able to see a full listing of all of your studies, full listing of all of your sites, your subjects, all of the payments that are related to that program. So you can really see a lot of detail at that program level that's sort of rolling up, and you can see that behind the scenes. So you don't have to actually go into other areas of the application to be able to see that detail. At the region and protocol levels, anything below that, such as sites, follow-up issues, CRFs, adverse events, clinical supplies, all of those are rolled up to the protocol level as well. So for a study manager, all of that becomes really relevant, and you can actually see, again, going to one area of the application, what the progress of your specific study is within the system. So if you need to do reconciliation for clinical supplies, for example, at the end of the study, and you want to be able to see what, if you sent out ancillary supplies and you want to get those back from the site, at the protocol level you can actually see all of the ancillary supplies that have been sent and whether they've been reconciled and returned back to your organization. And again, queries within the system are very, very simple. You can run ad hoc queries in nearly every view in the application to be able to, again, slice and dice that data to really segment out exactly what you're looking for. You can save queries for future use. So if you're looking at the same type of data every time you're going into the system, for example, looking at a listing of documents that have expired, you can actually save that query. So next time you come in, let's say a month from now, you can actually run that same query, and it'll show you everything that's expired as of that date. So there's lots of very beneficial functionality when it comes to queries. And since you've saved that, it's saved for your user, but you can also share queries with other users if you find that query would be helpful for another study manager within your organization, for example. So Study Manager, in addition to again the roll-up views that we discussed earlier, they're able to see quite a bit when it comes to subject enrollment and how the visibility into what's happening at the site and at the regions and at the protocol as it relates to subject enrollment, whether we're reaching our targets. You can actually monitor enrollment over time and see all of the visualization of that subject enrollment against your protocol. Subject statistics, you can actually identify some trends in early terminations and or screen fails. So not only do you track subject statuses where you have your early terms and your screen fails on a study, but you can actually capture the reasons why they early termed and why they screen failed. So if there's a high number of screen failures on a particular study, then maybe the inclusion-exclusion criteria needs to be modified. Maybe we need to do an amendment to reflect that. So you can actually make real-time changes, if necessary, as you identify how you need to shape your protocol based on this information that you're getting from subject enrollment and statistics. Site visits. So again, we talked about how the monitor submits a visit report within the system electronically. Now we'll talk about how the study manager interacts with that area of the application. So for site visits specifically, the study manager can add planned visits to the calendar for that site. So you can plan out your sites. You can actually assign specific monitors to each of those site visits. You can ensure visits are occurring in accordance with the monitoring plan, so you can track planned and actual dates against those site visits when they're actually happening. And then in the system, you can actually review and approve or reject trip reports electronically. So as the CRA and monitor are submitting those within the system, you'll get potentially a notification, or in the system you'll be able to see that this trip report is ready for review. You can review and approve or reject that trip report electronically within the system with electronic signatures. So these are, again, some of the enhancements that we made in the Ascend product in those configurations. But you can really use the features of the system to fully make your review and approval process and signature process electronic for all your trip reports within the system. And incidentally, we did do a webinar specifically on that topic. So if you're interested in looking at how we did the electronic signature and approvals for trip reports, there's another webinar available on our website that you can view the recording of. And expenses. So, from a study manager perspective, we talked about expenses a little bit during payments, but from an expenses standpoint, the protocol expenses that you're incurring, such as travel expenses for your CRAs, shipping vendors, printing vendors, biostat vendors, any contract CRAs that you're using, all of those are expenses that we need to potentially track within the system. So the study manager at the protocol level can put together a budget for expenses for that particular study, as well as all of the incurred expenses as they happen. So you can track actuals versus budget within the system as it relates to expenses as well. So those are our key roles within the system. And again, these can be tailored differently within your organization. But the key takeaways for what we covered today is that the clinical administrator, they set the standard by creating those shell records and various templates, as well as centrally administering the investigator database. Your clinical document associate ensures regulatory compliance by applying and completing those standard document templates that reflect SOPs and using queries to keep on top of outstanding or expiring documents. Your clinical finance resource exercises more control by defining standard payment amounts and individual site exception amounts and tracking payment details for Sunshine Act and other reporting. Your CRA and monitor maximizing your efficiency by having one central place to perform all of your site-related tasks from startup through conduct through closeout. Executives can get the answers fast. Since we're talking about a centralized repository of data, they can take advantage of the clinical program explorer view, all the roll-ups and queries and reports to get to those answers fast and in real time. And study managers flexing your power by using site and subject data to identify trends and make accurate projections, and then making real-time adjustments for better future plans. So that brings us to the question and answer portion of our webinar. So I've noticed that we have several questions that have come through. But if you have a question, please submit it in the chat function, and I'll try my best to answer all the questions that come through as time allows. So let me go through this list here. First question was, how can CTMS help me with the Sunshine Act legislation that's coming in soon? So we mentioned that a little bit. So around our payments that we're tracking, so reimbursement payments, payments for IRB fees, et cetera, you could actually create unlimited payment types within the system. So if you really want to define out specific types and track exactly what you're paying the investigator for, that will help you with Sunshine Act reporting specifically. Next question is, can you discuss a little bit on Siebel related to Oracle's data warehouse, LSH? So LSH is Oracle's solution for clinical data warehouse, and all of the systems that are the clinical solutions that Oracle provides actually, well, it doesn't necessarily have to be an Oracle product, but Clinical Data Warehouse, or LSH, actually brings all of that data together in a standardized format. So your clinical trial management data, your clinical safety data, your clinical data management data, bring that all into the warehouse to perform various statistical analysis on that data. So, I think that we have a webinar specific to CDA, which is Clinical Development Analytics, which sort of runs from a business intelligence standpoint against data from all of those different systems. And I'm not sure if we have an LSH webinar, but if not, I think we actually we do have an LSH webinar. I'm just told. So we have an LSH webinar on our website that you'll be able to access and see how that relates to CTMS specifically as well. And those are available on demand on our website. Can you please demonstrate how to generate ad hoc queries and save them? Unfortunately, we don't have the demo system up right now, but I think that again in our other webinars we do have demonstrations of the system, of the live system. So the other webinars do have live demonstrations of various functionality that the Siebel Clinical system offers, as well as our Ascend configuration. Next question is, how does Siebel control payment request approvals, and how can you ensure only authorized users are approving payments within the system? So Siebel has user controls within the system. So several levels of sort of security and user setup. So we talk about roles within the system today. So each role actually has the same access to the various areas of the system. But when we talk about specific access to records within the system, that's all driven by the study team. So you can actually build out 2 levels of security and 2 levels of user access in that manner. So even though I'm a study manager and somebody else might be a study manager, we both have access to the same areas of the system, but I will only see the records that are relevant to me that I can perform some action on, versus the other study manager will be able to just do those specific actions on their studies. So there's ways for us to ensure that the right individuals are performing those actions within the system. And specifically to payment request approvals, we've utilized sort of workflows and what Siebel calls state model to ensure that only certain users with a certain position within the system can take the status of a payment from requested to approved. So there's ways to really define out specifically who'd be doing what within the system. There's a question that will the slides be available after the webinar? Unfortunately, the slides will not be available, but again, we're recording this webinar, so it'll be available at any time after we upload it on demand, so you're able to view it multiple times after it's up on the system, on our website. Are documents uploaded by regular scanning, i.e. PDF format? So the Siebel system, it has a document tracking module. So document tracking is basically, records, that we're applying from a template that we're tracking the dates and statuses related to those documents. The Siebel system is not meant to be a document management system or a document store. It does have capability to store attachments, but it doesn't handle all of the robust features of a document management system like check-in and check-out, versioning, version control, etc. So what we do is actually integrate the Siebel system and the document tracking records to the document management system, which is actually storing that specific document in the document management system. So there's a key integration point between the two, and that's how we've handled that specific requirement. Is there a live demonstration of the system? Again, other webinars do handle some of the, we've actually done live demonstrations of the system in other webinars, so feel free to look through that. There's several webinars that we've actually done a live demonstration of integrations as well. But if you want a live demonstration of the system for your organization, feel free to go to our website and schedule. You can actually click the schedule a demonstration link, and we'll do a webinar for your organization. A demonstration for your organization. Here's a question: does the administrator assign the templates to users, or do the users select the templates that are available? It's actually the users that are selecting the templates. So the administrator will create the templates that are available, and then the user will select which template is relevant for their specific purpose. So for example, the administrator will create, let's say for trip reports, will create a site initiation monitoring template, a site routine monitoring template, and a site closeout monitoring template. So the users will know, depending on what site visit it is, which template to choose. So if it's an initiation visit, they'll choose the initiation template. If it's routine monitoring, they'll choose the routine monitoring. And if it's closeout, they'll choose closeout. So that's sort of how it works within the system. So the administrator selects or creates the template, and the users at various levels will then select which template is relevant. Our clinical data management group already uses BioPharm's EDC, so I think the RDC application. Would that be synchronized with the CTMS? Short answer is yes. So we've done the integration between Oracle RDC and CTMS in a variety of clients. So we can leverage everything that we've done in the past to build out an integration specifically for your environment, but we would need to sort of build and apply that integration specifically to your EDC solution and your CTMS. See, BioPharm EDC systems. Okay, yeah. So we would have to, as a follow-up to that EDC question, we would have to look at, we would have to build out that specific integration. But the way that we approach integrations within CTMS is that we've do an XML standards-based, SOA-based integration where the CTMS system that's accepting this data, looking for the subject and subject visit and procedure information that's coming in from either the clinical data management or EDC or IVRS, we actually build only a single interface in CTMS that can accept data from multiple external sources. So that's how we approach these integrations. So even in the future, if you're not using that EDC system, or you choose to use a different EDC, or you have another EDC vendor or a clinical data management system or an IVRS system, it will actually work still with the integration that we put in place. And so that's how we approach it. For more information about that specific integration. There is a webinar specific to integrations of CTMS, and we do a live demonstration of the integration that we've done between the Oracle Clinical and RDC solution to Siebel CTMS. Here's a question. Why is the administrator the only one that can update contact account information once the information is in the system, i.e. adding a phone number, etc.? So the reason that we found that this is best practice, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a single administrator, it could be a group, is because when you open that up to a larger user base, when people are adding, let's say, an address for an individual, let's say Dr. Jones was at 100 Main Street, and now I'm using Dr. Jones, and I know that Dr. Jones is no longer at 100 Main Street. He's at 100 Broad Street. If I go in to the system and I overwrite that address and I start typing in that address and saying 100 Main Street is now 100 Broad Street, well, effectively I've changed that address for everybody else that was using that 100 Main Street address. So it really leads to data integrity issues within the system where you've actually changed the data, changed that address to physical address of multiple individuals potentially within the system. So the actual entry and update of the contact account and address information is best handled through this administrator group, and then any and all associations of those records is handled by the users. So for example, if I'm that same scenario, if Dr. Jones I know no longer works at 100 Main Street and he's at 100 Broad Street, I can disassociate the 100 Main Street address and associate the 100 Broad Street address, because both of those addresses are available in my investigator database. And if they're not, then the administrator would have to add 100 Broad Street within the investigator database, and then I, as a user, can associate that address to Dr. Jones. So that's sort of the best practice. That's how it's best. It works best that way, and that's how we've seen. If we open it up to sort of the entire user base, very, very quickly we lead to duplicates, we lead to dirty data, we lead to addresses being deleted in the system, and then we have sort of a cleanup issue that we need to do within the system. Next question here I have is, have you done PIPs for Siebel Clinical to OCRDC? A PIP, for those of you that are not familiar, is an application, is an integration, prepackaged integration application that Oracle has created and Oracle supports. So there's a variety of PIPs out there for the one referenced here is the integration between Siebel Clinical and OCRDC specifically. So this is a integration application that works specifically with those two applications. It's sort of prepackaged, but it still requires configuration to sort of put it in place. I have not worked on a PIP implementation, and the reason being that a couple of the organizations that we did this integration with, they had quite a few additional requirements around their integration that the PIP didn't really handle out of the box, such as adverse events, protocol deviations. They wanted to bring a lot of that in, and the PIP didn't allow for that. So we actually built, again, an XML-based, standards-based. We took the same approach, SOA-based approach that the PIP has, and that built out an integration specific to that organization's requirements. And again, they have the same ability to, if they get another EDC vendor or an IVRS vendor or another instance of OCRDC, they can actually import into their CTMS in the exact same manner. Another question here, do CRAs need to manually enter type info that actual templates if the scanned copy cannot be uploaded? Let me read that again. Templates. Okay, so I guess what this is asking is that when you have templates that are applied within the system, where you're tracking to sort of planned information, does the CRA need to manually enter or type in the actual information as it occurs? In some cases, yes. So, like for documents, for activities and milestones that are being entered within the system, as those occur, we'll have to manually sort of mark those as complete or manually put in the actual values. But for subject and subject visit and procedure stuff, if you're integrated in that manner, then they do not have to manually enter actual completed dates and completions for those subject visit and procedures that are already coming from your potentially from your clinical data management or EDC solution. So that's the short answer there. So I think we're out of time, and I think I've addressed all the questions that came through. But if you do have additional questions, feel free to send those to me. So I want to thank everyone for joining us for this webinar. I hope you found the information useful. In October, we will be taking a break from webinars because we're going to be at the Oracle Health Science User Group annual conference in Toronto, and we're actually presenting there as well. So we hope to see you all there. We do have one additional webinar scheduled for 2011. On November 17th, we're actually going to be co-presenting with our clinical safety and pharmacovigilance group on managing risk with CTMS and safety implementations. And so because of the joint nature of the webinar, it's actually going to be 90 minutes instead of 60. Look for the announcement and registration form in our upcoming quarterly webinar. And our 2012 CTMS webinar series will begin in late January or early February. So we're going to continue this on next year as well. As a reminder, today's presentation will be available for download from our website within 24 hours. If you have any additional questions, or again, if you'd like to schedule a demo of Siebel Clinical or Ascend, feel free to contact me directly, or you can actually click on the schedule demo links on our website. My email address is on the screen. We can actually tailor the demo to meet your interest, including presenting them by job function, just like we did in today's webinar. So feel free to contact us, and we can discuss on how we tailor that demo for your organization. Thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.